Hey all, this program is rated M for Mature, presenting Master and Apprentice Photography.
So welcome back to episode 2. We appreciate all the feedback we got in episode 1. Let's get started.
Cold open.
That's how it goes.
You just say cold open.
Cold open. That's gonna be that'll be our intro from now on. Just cold open.
Cold open. I think the people listening appreciate a cold open rather than disingenuous bullshit.
But that's what they're here for, the disingenuous bullshit.
No, they're here for the funny bullshit.
Oh, okay. So, on this episode, I want to talk lenses. Lenses are important, right?
Lenses are the most important part of starting photography. Well, and doing photography. It's the most important part of the camera is the lens. Absolutely.
So, what would be... Okay, I'll just get right into it. What's a good starter lens for in terms of like specs that a beginner would be looking at?
Yeah, great question. So, it's super overwhelming once you start looking into what lenses you can buy for your camera, especially when you're first starting out. Budget is always an issue. You don't want to spend $10,000 on lenses, and it's actually super easy to spend $10,000 on 2 lenses. So the big problem is you're looking online and you see something and you say, "Oh, I would like that lens. Seems like a good price. Let's Google a review for it," and you'll just see like 500 people telling you how it's like the worst lens ever made. And if you try using it, all your pictures will be garbage, and what you really need is this professional lens, and it's like $6,000. So lenses are super important. There are so many to get, and it also depends on what you really want to take pictures of first. If you want to start with... yeah, go ahead.
So we talked a little bit last episode about how there's different types of photography. You said you do people photography?
Yeah.
And then there was nature photography. Like, how many different types of photography are there? And, like, do any of them kind of, like, cross over in terms of, like, equipment and gear?
Yeah, sure. So portrait photography, which is, people photography, is generally very much all-purpose. There are so many types of photography, because even just doing portrait photography, there's some people do what's called beauty photography, which is like really close up, just portraits of people's faces, or headshot photography, which is just really like a picture of a face. Some people do more editorial or environmental, which are like people in their environment. Let's say a painter in his studio, a doctor in his office or her office, a pilot in their cockpit. Those are all types of environmental portraiture. And there's nature photography, but nature can mean photographing lions from 500 yards away with a super long zoom lens. It can also mean doing macro photography of insects in the forest. Okay. So
you focus on portrait photography, so let's focus on that since that's what you know.
Sure.
Or people photography, I think is what you called it. So lens wise, what is your go-to, or what's your recommendation for people who want to get into people photography?
So whenever anyone asks me what's the first lens I should get, my answer is constantly get a 50mm prime lens, wide open aperture. So what that means is a prime lens is a lens that stays at one focal length. It stays at 50mm. So many cheap lenses are zoom lenses, and most of the compact cameras that are like these all-in-one cameras also have fairly long zoom lenses. And with the zoom lens, there's lots of moving parts, as you can imagine. So the more moving parts you have, usually the lower the optical quality is, and the smaller the aperture ring is. And you want like a lens that can open up to a wide aperture, because that's how you get those blurry backgrounds that everyone loves to play around with when they're beginning, and especially when you're doing portraiture, you do want that blurrier background. You want to get good separation. So they're great for indoors, because the bigger the aperture, the more light comes into the camera, and the easier it is to use it indoors in lower light, etc. And why I say 50mm is more or less what's called a normal view length. So it's normal because it's more or less what your eyes see. So what you see is what you get, because it takes a while to learn how to think creatively using a focal length that you're not used to looking at, like something like 85 millimeters, 200 millimeters, super zoomed in. You end up not really creating these interesting images. You're more or less going, I'm going to point my camera at this and take a picture. You know, here's a flag, here's a building, here's a flower, here's a person, instead of, you know, like a pleasing composition. So I like 50 millimeters. It's good enough that you can actually walk up to a person in speaking distance and really get like a nice portrait of them. You can show a bit of environment if you just back up a little bit. So it's really like a great all-around lens. I like using 35 millimeter a lot when I'm doing environmental stuff or documentary type stuff. But you do have to get a bit closer to use that, and it shows a lot of background. So you have to start learning how to watch out for background elements, which can be super overwhelming when you're just beginning in photography. So I like 50 millimeter is the place to start with.
Okay, so 50 millimeter keeps your, I guess your target in frame, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the background stuff. But 35 is where you start getting more artistic, I guess, or more
exactly
stylish.
Exactly. For me personally, shooting 35 millimeters is a lot of fun. That's a real documentarian lens in terms of when I want to take a portrait of someone, but I really want to show the environment because I want to show you what's happening. You know, this is a bride walking down the aisle with all the people around her. Instead of, if I'm cropped in a bit tight, it's, here's just, a bride in a wedding dress, and she's just, she's walking down the aisle, but all you can see is just like the bride, which, don't get me wrong, is still an important picture because you can actually see her expression and things like that, which is also important. So I always do both, which is why I have two camera bodies on me. But I like the 35 millimeter photos better. Okay.
So we talked about a bunch of different specs now. What are the most important ones to pay attention to when you're shopping for a lens?
The most important specs when you're buying a lens should be the aperture. So the aperture just means the opening, and what happens is the opening of the camera, it's a circle. It's like all these blades that make a circle, and they can get bigger or smaller, and you start playing with the physics. So it's a bit confusing when you start learning it, because also we measure aperture by f-stops, and the smaller the number, the bigger the opening, because it's a ratio. So
okay.
It gets really confusing, but basically big circle, blurry background, smaller circle, sharper, and like less light coming in. So it's also a function of the smaller your aperture, the more your shutter has to be open. If your shutter's open too much, image starts to get blurry. But that's a later lesson for you, Joe.
Sounds like a lot of math and science involved.
Yeah, well, this is why there is that element to this hobby where people really like to get nerdy with it, and it's super important to learn your exposures like the back of your hand, because once you, like I mentioned last podcast, once you have that and you're able to take it out of mind, you can focus more on creating nice images instead of what the settings are. But the most important specs is definitely aperture. If you're going for a zoom lens, what focal length? Usually the lenses that try to do everything well tend to be lacking in most areas. So I like to stick with prime lenses. I really only own prime lenses, and if I want to get closer to something, I just get closer to it. Another important spec is price. You want to get a good value for your lens. It's things like sometimes I photograph products and I look for a macro lens. Another important spec is how close you need to be something for it to focus. There's some lenses, they're called macro lenses, that let you focus when your lens is right next to an object almost. And is it worth the price for that? If you're shooting people, maybe it's not worth it. If you're shooting insects or jewelry, yes, it's absolutely worth it. So do you want to spend $2,000 to get a macro lens? But there's so much fun you can have with macro lenses because you can get a close-up of someone's eyeball, for instance, or funky things like that.
Okay, I don't see how that would work in a wedding setting, but I can see how it could be fun.
Not everything I do is wedding. It's it's also if you're photographing a newborn baby, maybe you do want to get a close up of their eyes. It's just like an interesting artistic shot. Is it okay? Do you need a professional macro lens to do that? No. There are cheap macro lenses too, and it all depends on how often you plan on using your camera and what you're going to use it for.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to think of like an example of when you'd want to do that, and it didn't make sense to me. But then you said, you want to take a picture of your child or something like that, and I'm like, oh, okay. So exactly. I'm glad I asked that question, because I was like, that's weird, but you had a good answer, so that's what I'm here for.
Happy to. Or your cat or your dog. People like to photograph their pets. And if you have a bigger aperture, you can use a faster shutter speed, which is super important when you're photographing children or cats or dogs running around. You want to be able to freeze the action. So,
okay, so slower shutter speed is basically like that's what they do slow motion with or whatever with shutter speed.
Exactly. Yeah, if you want to freeze the action, you want a fast shutter speed. If I'm photographing boxing, I bump my ISO up, which is the sensitivity of the sensor. You can almost call it gain for a camera.
Okay.
So I do that, and I open up my aperture because I want to maximize my shutter speed, because I want to freeze the action. If the shutter's open too long, you get these blurry trails on the movement.
Gotcha. Okay.
The good thing is that when you're starting out, you can just use the automatic mode for a while. Or you can do something, they have like modes where you just set the aperture you want. Let's say you want the aperture to, for blurry backgrounds, wide open, and then the camera will just figure everything else out for you.
Okay. All right, so aperture, focal length, price, those are the three big ones you want to look at?
Sure, exactly. And then when you start getting into, maybe you're getting into the swing of things, you're really enjoying this hobby, there's like luxury things you can look for. The coating on the lens so you don't get flare. The motor, so it's a bit quieter, a bit smoother.
Okay, so like, what about the like autofocus or not?
The autofocus.
The manual versus I guess auto.
Right. If you're planning on doing a lot of video, you'll probably use manual focus a lot. But in photography, like autofocus is one of the most important innovations in photography. You can use manual focus. There's a lot of cameras now that they'll have like a bright red outline around whatever's sharp, so it's kind of easier to do it. But especially when you're using wide open apertures, where you have a small depth of field, which means whatever's in focus, there's like a small plane of focus. So let's say you're focusing on someone's eye. What will be in focus might be their eye, and it's like from the tip of their nose to maybe an inch after the eye is in focus, and everything else will be blurry. So if you're doing that by hand, you're going to mess up a lot, and everyone's going to think you're a loser and that you're wasting your time. They're going to tease you.
So actually, it's interesting that you said that, though, because I would have thought like autofocus would be more important in videography, because like you're constantly moving, and when you're doing photography, you're basically stationary most of the time, I would think, right?
Yes, that's a great point. It's actually very insightful. That's one of the hardest things about doing video is also when you're imagining a shot, people are moving. So you're not just freezing a moment. You're trying to compose not just the background, you're also the movement of people. I think it's because when you use autofocus, it doesn't always get it. With a photo, it needs to be in focus. You capture the moment, and then usually people come out of quote focus quicker than the camera can keep up with it, which is fine for photography as long as you get it at that decisive moment.
Okay.
Rather than the whole scene needs to be in focus. So yeah, a lot of these video guys are amazing at tracking, which is what it's called when you're doing that. And the camera also has these auto tracking focus modes that are great in sports photography. As someone's getting closer or farther away, the camera knows to follow that subject. In weddings, I don't mess around with that because they're not 100%, and I need to be as consistent as I can. So I like to keep things like that.
You don't want to take chances.
Yeah.
You don't take risks at weddings.
No, absolutely not. It's my number one fear is to fuck up a wedding and have someone be like, I really wanted this shot. What do I tell them? Oh, I was trying out a new camera mode. Didn't really work out, but here's your blurry foot.
Because I was thinking, I was like, last episode you said you take like between 10,000 and 15,000 photos per wedding. So I was like, he's got plenty of photos, but like if somebody wants a specific one, you can't mess that one up.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And what I take and what I deliver is different. If the dress is hanging up in a window and I'm going for details or anything. So I might take 100 photos of like this dress hanging, doing different angles and whatnot, but I might only be delivering 3.
Yeah, you picked the best 3 though, right? That's it.
Yeah. No, I picked the mediocre 3.
You gotta manage expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
If they hire you again, you don't want to blow it all in your first shoot.
Exactly. If they think I'm too good and then I'm not as good the next time.
Okay. So my next question. You find yourself at a photo shoot with only one lens in the world. Whether you own it or you know about it, which lens would you hope that would be?
Hard to answer that as a professional because there are so many cool lenses to play around with.
Go into the mindset of like, oh no, I forgot to pack something. I only have this bag with me.
Yeah.
Let's hope this is in there. Which would it be?
Off the top of my head, it's the 50mm. I already mentioned why it's my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I love using the 50mm. As people will realize as they listen to this podcast, I don't shut up. And it's the same when I'm photographing people. I like the 50mm because I can be close to them and I can talk and I can, coax reactions out of them, shoot the shit, make them at ease. There are people that love 85mm for photos or 200mm for portraits, and 200mm, it's like you're 50 yards away, you're zoomed in. That's how you get these super creamy backgrounds that everyone likes. Except you're not talking to your subject. You're just letting them kind of sit there and pose, and you're across the street from them. And for me, I really like going for, I use the word genuine a lot. And that's really what I want, authentic portraits. So I want to get closer to people. And obviously there's a trade-off to everything. The closer you get, the more kind of distorted the image also gets. But this is all physics stuff with lenses and everything. So I guess one of the things you'll start learning when you delve into photography tips is, one of the tips is always use the longest lens you have. It's better for what's called compression. And then I tend to break that rule because I really like photographing at 50mm and 35mm instead of 85 or 200mm, or 135 is another popular one.
And that's more of a style choice, right? Not a...
Yeah, it's completely stylistic.
Okay. Because, you have, I guess this goes for all professional photographers, you have your look that you're going for when you shoot, and you go with the hardware that works for that look, not what's everyone else thinks is better type thing, right?
Exactly. And the most important thing I can tell anyone interested in photography or already in the midst of a photography career would be, all that matters is that you like your photos. Taste is so varied in photography, and there will always be someone telling you, well, why didn't you use that lens? This is what I would have used for that. And really the answer is to look them straight in the eye and tell them to fuck off.
That's the professional thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so lenses are super important. How do you carry and protect your lenses at shoots so that they don't get damaged or anything bad happen to them, basically?
Well, now's the time that everyone's going to hate me, and and I'm really going to shoot all my credibility in the foot. You always want to keep your lenses protected because once they're scratched, that's when the optical quality starts to decrease. If the lens is scratched, you'll start distorting your image.
Do you just throw them out at that point if they get scratched?
No, you'd be surprised how much you can actually get away with, especially if you're shooting wide open. But if you start doing landscapes, let's say, and you're photographing with a smaller aperture where everything starts coming to focus more, you might see the scratches in the sky. But even if they're light scratches, not really. But you want to make sure when you're changing your lenses, you want to do it fast because you don't want dust to get into your camera or into the lenses. Otherwise you get these black spots on your images that you have to Photoshop out. It's super annoying. That's one thing I'm very particular about, holding my camera down when I'm changing a lens so dust doesn't get in. It's always keeping your lens caps on your lenses right away when you're done with them. That's what I'm lazy with. I'm so lazy with that.
Okay.
Keeping your lens hood on is important. The lens hood it's like a black plastic, or sometimes it's metal, and it goes around the outside of the lens, and it's just to block light from coming in at odd angles. But it's also great because it protects you from like walking into walls with your camera, or if your camera is like on your shoulder and you're banging into doors, and that's what I'm really bad with. I'm always swinging my camera around into shit.
So do you carry extra lenses on you, or you just keep you got the 35 millimeter and the 50 millimeter on each different camera?
Yeah, I generally photograph 35 and 50 or 35 and 85. So I always have those three lenses with me. I have an extra 50 millimeter lens in my bag, and that's not by design. It's just I upgraded my 50 millimeter lens, and I didn't feel like selling the old one, and I figured why not have a spare?
Because that is the most important one, you said.
Yeah, it's the most important one for me. Like when I go with my family on vacation, with the wife and kids, and we go to New York City a lot, or my wife loves going to Disney. I don't like traveling with a lot of gear, so I'll just bring like the smallest camera body I have, and I always choose one lens, either a 50 millimeter or a 35 millimeter. So it's fun sometimes, like, to keep yourself limited and really learn how to maximize a lens.
Okay, so your extra lenses, they're in the bag. You don't carry any others on you, just the ones that are on the camera bodies themselves?
I'll have the two on the camera bodies. It depends what I'm photographing. If I'm at a wedding, yes, I have all my lenses are with me. I even keep a fisheye lens, like an 8 millimeter, and that's the one that gives you like the big circle that looks like a fishbowl. I'm with my hands. I am making a circle to show you what a fishbowl looks like. Even though,
oh yes, I am imagining you holding up your hands in a circle.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine me like a fucking idiot.
So I'm trying to get at, like, what do you do with those lenses that you're carrying on you? Do you just have them in your pockets? Do you have them in a bag around you or something?
No, so I leave them in my bag, and generally, if I'm doing a shoot in studio, I'll usually have a table with all the gear that'll have an assistant set up, and then if I need a lens, I can just yell at someone to come bring it to me.
Ooh, if
I'm at a wedding, I just keep whatever's in my bag. My bag is always near. But I already have an idea of what I need for what part of the wedding. Obviously, every venue is different. Some of them will be longer. And as soon as I walk in, I'll say, like, oh, I should use my 85 millimeter instead of my 50 for this. So I just decide, and then I'll keep my 50 in the bag. And then I know, but maybe during the party I'll switch it out. But I have all these planned beforehand. Some people have assistants at their wedding who don't take pictures, but also are also there to bring their lenses for them and handle all their equipment and things like that. I do not like working like that.
You don't like having people help you out?
It's funny because I am such a prick when you speak to me that you'd think that I have no qualms with bossing people around or making people do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I really don't like doing it. There's times when I'm on set and I'm asking people to fix the lighting, and then I just go ahead and do it. And it's not because I don't think they can do it. I'm just like, oh, you know what? Don't worry, you're talking to that person, have a good time. Don't worry, I'll set up the softbox.
Didn't mean to inconvenience you. Don't worry, I'll do your job. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I'm so used to, especially when I was starting out, like, the budgets weren't there to hire assistants. Like, I couldn't afford an assistant, so I carried everything myself and did everything. So you'll notice whenever we discuss gear or even my stylistic choice, I'm always about keeping things simple and keeping things genuine and keeping them small, not too many moving parts. I've seen photo crews where it's 4 people and they have every weird gadget and gizmo, and people tend to be kind of intimidated by that.
Okay. Yeah, you don't want to intimidate your target if you're doing, people photography.
Exactly. And it's
I keep
also
saying target like you're like an assassin or something like that. Your subject. There you go.
Yeah. Well, when you get into photography, it's like my wife when she listens to me speak. Oh, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm going to go shoot a baby.
Oh, just another day at the photo shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
You learn to ignore it. Well, for me, shooting, I'm from Canada, so shooting only means photography. I don't even think of anything else.
That is a good point. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so piggybacking off of my last question, are there any common mistakes people make in regards to handling or maintaining their lenses that you'd like to address, or that you might have made when you were learning?
Don't wipe your lens with your shirt.
Ooh.
Get a microfiber cloth, even if you spend spend a little extra to get a good one, $8. It's worth it because things like using tissue paper or your shirt or your tie, if you're wearing a tie, or the bottom of your skirt, it's rough material.
I've seen people use their tie before. I was like, wait a minute, that's probably not a good idea.
You do not want to do that. It's coarse material. It's very sensitive to the glass on the lens, and you don't want to scratch it up. Okay. Second, when you're done with your lens, put the lens cap right on. Don't be like me. I tend to, okay, I'm done with this lens, and I'll have the hood on it so it's not touching anything, but I'll just toss it into my bag. And then maybe I don't use the lens for a week, and then I pick it up like a week later, and I realize like it's just been sitting out without a lens cap for a week. So, I have to start cleaning out the dust in it and the gunk and everything.
Ooh, ouch. Okay.
Yeah, but that's just when I'm photographing weddings, I'm there for 15 hours or more, and coming home at 2 a.m, I'm just so tired. I just forget it. I worry about things another day. And then
that's a problem for future Marlon.
Yeah, exactly. It's a problem for future Marlon, and future Marlon's like, "Fuck, past Marlon, son of a bitch." Now it's like the day, like an hour before a shoot, and I'm sitting there like wiping my lenses. And
wow. Okay, so microfiber cloth. Put the lens cap on as soon as you're done. Anything else?
Just a good lens cleaning solution.
Ooh, I never thought of that.
Exactly. You don't need to always be cleaning your lens, but you wear eyeglasses, so you know the struggle.
Yeah, I use my shirt though to clean my eyeglasses, which I'm now thinking that's not a good idea anymore.
Yeah, I use my shirt all the time for my eyeglasses, so
should get a microfiber cloth.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense now that I think about it, because, like you said, the lens is like the most important part of the camera.
Right.
You need to take care of that. If anything happens to the lens, the camera's useless.
Yeah. There's also fun things like lasers can ruin the sensor of your camera.
I saw a YouTube video where somebody was recording lasers, and now they have these black circles like permanently on every picture or video they take.
Yeah. It just burns the the sensor is like the retina of the camera, if you want to use an eye analogy, and a laser will burn it if it just hits it at the perfect angle. So most DJs and things use LEDs now because they're cheaper, they are bright enough, they're great. But there are some of the old school guys that still have lasers, and they just mess up digital cameras. It's a real big problem in our industry.
So you have to know not to point your camera at lasers then. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Not something I ever would have thought of, but I'm glad you brought it up, because now that's all I'm going to think about.
Yeah, that's what I'm here
for. So in terms of handling lenses, they're pretty sturdy, right? They're not, they call them glass, but they're not fragile, right?
Right. Well, some of them are if you've ever, I know you haven't. Once you get to hold a $5,000 lens, it feels like a solid piece of machinery. Like the casing will be metal. There's so much like heavy glass in it because like high quality lenses have this thick, nice glass, and it just feels like solid. The lens that I always recommend to get is like the 50mm, and Nikon and Canon both make a super cheap version of it, which is maybe $50, and the optical quality is great. The autofocus motor is super loud, and the casing is plastic. Canon's 50mm is famously known as the Plastic Fantastic, or the Nifty 50.
Wow.
And, yeah, exactly. And that's like that's the lens to start off with photography. But it's so cheap that they break easily if you mishandle them. I've broken a few of them starting out, just not doing anything wrong per se. But if you drop the lens, it just comes apart. Yeah, it's not even worth it to fix them. You just toss them. I think I hit one with a baseball bat once. Like, to get rid of it, I just...
Okay. Like a Office Space style?
Yeah, exactly.
You're just like, okay, I'm tired of this lens now.
Yeah, damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Yeah, because like I was researching lenses, which my research was very minimal, but everybody referred to them as glass, and then I just had it in my head, like ingrained in my mind, that it's super fragile. You gotta like hold it with gloves, and like you gotta gently place it down or whatever. But that's not the case at all. Well, for the more expensive ones, for the more quality ones, I should say. Exactly.
So you don't need to walk around in white gloves like you're handling like precious gems.
That's what I pictured in my mind too.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I must get my lens replacement gear out, and okay, now I will handle this lens with care.
But it's the same thing with any hobby. For me, they're just tools. So
they're
not sure.
Like $5,000 tools, though.
Right, exactly. But my stuff is all scratched on the outside. When I sell used gear, people think it's been through a war. So it's great because like I keep the glass in perfect condition, but the outside of the lens is, they're greasy because my hands have been on them so often. And as much as I wash my hands, I'm still like at a wedding all day.
Mm-hmm.
I can't help it. These scratches from just banging into things. When I go down on one knee to get an angle, or if I'm bracing myself against a church pew, for instance, like it's gonna get scratched, and I don't worry about it
as long as it's not the glass itself.
Yeah, exactly. If you buy a sports car, everyone buys a new car, and like you're worried about any scratch in the parking lot, right? Like a professional race car driver isn't getting out of his car at the end of the race and going, "Oh my God, the finish! It's not shiny anymore."
That's true, yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of how I see it.
All right, so on to my next question. Have you broken any lenses before? And if so, is there a story behind it?
So I've broken that plastic 50mm lens I told you I had, but that was everyone breaks those. It's like a rite of passage. It's just what happens when you buy something cheap. But man, I can't reiterate enough how great those lenses are to start with, though, especially because they're cheap. You don't have to worry about experimenting or playing around with it. It's $50 is, obviously it's not like you want to spend $50 a week just wasting money. But like in the film days when you had to buy film, but you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, so let's put a pause on this question real quick.
Yeah.
So the $50 lens that you're talking about. When you said that, like, me who knows very little about photography, I was like, that is extremely cheap.
Yeah.
Like, what is, like, the average cost of the lenses that you use, you think?
The ones for Fujifilm, the lenses are rather cheap, actually, because they're smaller cameras, so they're smaller lenses, so there's less glass. So, like, the most expensive lens I have is the most expensive lens that Fujifilm makes, and it's $1,000.
And that's pretty cheap compared to lenses, from what I understand.
Yeah. So, in Canon, I used to have the Canon 50mm 1.2, which was like the nicest lens, and it was $2,000. And there was so like the $5,000, $6,000 lenses are more of like the 400mm like zoom lenses that like sports photographers use.
Wow. Okay.
And then you can look up B&H in New York, which is like a famous camera store. I'm sure you know about it.
Oh yes, I know of B&H. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had a two, or I think it was Adorama maybe, but they had a $250,000 lens, which like.
What kind of camera would you put that on? Like.
Oh, on an SLR, like on a Canon. It was a Canon lens. Yeah, there was only like 4 of them ever made, and they were made for like some sultan in Dubai, and they're gigantic, and like they were able to take pictures from New York City, like from Manhattan, like of windows in like New Jersey.
Oh my God! Okay.
Yeah, and it was crazy to see the pictures. I'll find you the article.
Okay. The reason I brought that up is because you keep saying like $50 are cheap lenses, which that's extremely cheap for a lens. Yeah. But like for people that are new to photography, they're like, wait, the lens goes on the camera. Why would the lens be more? And like that just didn't register for me when I was like shopping around.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, when you go back to recording, you should talk about that, because like that's something I never realized. When you're like, oh, why are some lenses more expensive than the actual camera?
And we are actually recording still. I put a pause on the question to go to a new question.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean,
it's our second one.
I'll edit in post. Don't worry, we're good.
Leave it in. That's what I said. I like genuine moments, right? It's fine.
Okay. I mean, you were handling it like we were recording, and I was like, wait, does he not know we're recording?
When I'm recording, I'm just talking. I'm just answering your questions.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's what this is about.
I'm really proud of myself. I'm noticing I'm not saying like as much as I did the first time. Maybe I'm less
now
nervous.
You said it. You're gonna start saying it because you pointed out.
Oh, it's been in the back of my mind.
I hear you pausing a little extra sometimes. Like, ooh, he could fit a like in there.
Yeah. I'm like, damn, that was a good one. I noticed I'm also less funny this episode, but
I mean, we did record last one on a Monday. Mondays are the funniest days of the week, so
okay,
I don't know. God damn it.
I was prepared to yell at Chris a bit, but that's a future surprise.
Well, you just ruined it.
Now you can edit these. We'll fix it in post.
Okay, yeah. You can't pick and choose what I get to edit now.
Yeah, exactly. See, it's your time, so I don't give a fuck.
So yes, that's what I wanted to get to, was the whole $50 is extremely cheap for a lens.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny because when I was shopping around for a camera, I found a camera that I liked. It was about $300. It was just the body, and I was like, this is a really good deal. And then everyone's like, oh, you need to get this lens. And then the lens ended up being $450. So I was like, wait, what? It's more than the camera?
Which camera?
And it was the Panasonic G7. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember what the lens was, but they're like, oh, you can get a cheap knockoff lens or something like that for that camera. And it still ended up being like $350 on eBay.
Yeah, third-party lens. Third-party lens, what you want to...
But like, yeah, I was looking at it, I was like, wow, I can't afford this hobby. This is way too much for my blood. I can't do this. But now you're saying there's a $50 lens out there that works.
I don't know about for Panasonic, though.
No, but I can learn on a different camera. Doesn't have to be that one. I just found that one because it was cheap.
Right.
But yeah, if I could find a $50 lens with like a $400 or $500 camera, it's still cheaper than what I was looking at.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's okay. Sorry to get sidetracked. So you've broken those $50 lenses before. Have you broken any non-$50?
Yes, I have broken non-50. But let's re-ask the question. But if you want to talk about things, money, it's also the same thing with PC, right? Mm-hmm. Sure, you have an expensive PC. That's your job and your hobby. Same thing for me. I'm sitting next to my PC. It's not. It needs to be upgraded now because I only have a 980 Ti.
Oh darn!
Yeah, exactly. I need to. That was supposed to be what I was going to upgrade this summer for work. I need a beast computer, and I can't do that because I got no job. Now I'm a professional podcaster. Actually, I'm not a professional.
We're still amateurs.
No, yeah,
it's not getting paid.
So I don't have anything now, so I can't upgrade my computer. So it's the same. Like if someone's talking to me about photography, I'm like, yeah, it's super easy to get set up. Don't worry, you just need to start with $5,000.
And I think that is, like you said before, price is a big factor when picking your lens.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you go too high, you price yourself out of this hobby or possible profession.
Right.
You can definitely go overboard with costs in this line of work, which I think it seems like it's a fine line, getting the cost per performance, basically. Like if we were talking about PCs, you don't want to spend so much that you're, getting diminishing returns. And I don't want to keep calling it a hobby. Yeah. But I don't want to call it a profession because I'm not a professional.
But it is a hobby. Like there's people that are painting for hobbies. There's people that get paid $400 million.
It can be a hobby, but like what you're doing is an art. Like,
but it's thank you for making me feel like I'm important. But it started off as my hobby. You're the only person
I'm talking to on this podcast. Don't worry.
Yeah,
you're all my attention right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm actually as a photographer, I'm much more of a possessive type person than I am as a husband or I was as a boyfriend. Yeah, if my wife is like, "Oh, Chris Hemsworth is so hot," I'm like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, he is. Look at him. It's gorgeous. God of Thunder." If she's on Instagram, she's like, "Oh, look at this picture. Look at this wedding picture. It's really nice." And I look over and it's not my photo. I'm like, fuck you. How fucking dare you say that's a good picture? Like, I'll tell you what's a good picture, okay? I'll tell you what's a good picture. And like, don't you ever fucking say it's a good picture, Like, I'll divorce you. Like, we're done. And she's like, well, don't you think it's a good picture? I'm like, yes. Like, why are you mad?
You're not allowed to think that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not my picture, so you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that.
Yeah, like, why are you upset? I'm like, because I didn't fucking take it. Then I like
go watch Chris Hemsworth. Don't look at those Instagram pictures.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, hey, I'm going on a date tonight. I'm like, yeah, no worries, have fun. She's like, yeah,
take these amazing pictures.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm like, how dare you? Yeah, exactly. You come back.
Okay, got a little sidetracked there. Back to the question at hand.
Yeah.
What other lenses have you broken, and how have you broken them in like spectacular fashion?
Right. So every lens, more or less, the popular lenses usually have an entry level tier, a mid tier, and professional tier. It's actually interesting how you mentioned diminishing returns, because that's exactly what you get. You want to start spending $1,000 for a minimal amount of improvement. I had a mid-tier 50mm when I was still shooting Canon, and that lens is about $400 Canadian. Or a bit more. I think it's like $450 Canadian, which, trying to think for that time, the exchange rate and everything, I think that's like 350 Freedom dollars.
Okay.
And it's a nice metal lens, and it was good. And I remember I was super drunk. I was talking to the videographer who I work with a lot. His name is Ellie, and we were just shooting the shit. And I remember it was late in the night. Oh, something was happening. I went to go take a picture, so I just put my second body down on the table. Like, I put it flat down, and it just, yeah, exactly. And I set it down, and it just tilted forwards onto the lens, and it just,
ooh,
it was the weirdest type thing, because it kind of like broke off at the mount.
Okay, that's weird.
And yeah, it was weird. Luckily, it was at the end of the night, and I didn't really need it, so I did have to go buy one that week.
Okay, so how would you handle that if that happened like on a photo shoot, though? Would you just be like, oh, don't have that lens anymore? Or would like...
Yeah, exactly. Kind of switch
there's
lenses.
No way to like improvise, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no, there's nothing you can do. I mean, I have two 50mm lenses now. I'm using Fujifilm, and I have those two Fujis. But yeah, at that time, if that happened on an actual shoot, I would have to either switch to a longer lens and back up, or a wider lens and move forward.
Okay, so your 50mm breaks or whatever, and you have the 65 you said?
The 35.
Or 35?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, yeah, the 35.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you have to adapt, and all of a sudden, all of your photos are being taken from a different angle or a different perspective or something.
Right. For me, but like the 35mm is when I'm using 95% of the time at a wedding reception anyways. It's mostly like the first dance I like to shoot a bit tight, or if it's a speech, I'm not generally taking too many wide shots. I just want whoever's speaking, holding, close to the microphone, maybe looking up and laughing or something. So that's what I'm looking for, focusing on that. So that's what I'll use the 50 for if it's a smaller room, or the 85 for if it's a wider room.
Okay.
So when it broke, I was upset, because I knew I had to spend money to get a new one over a dumb mistake, which is the worst. It's the worst when it's your fault. I love blaming other people for my misfortunes. It's easy, it's fun. But yeah,
and you don't feel bad. You don't feel stupid about it.
Yeah, exactly. But when I know when I'm only to blame, and it's very, very upsetting to me. And this was 100% me. So I had my 35, so it wasn't a big deal. And if I broke my 35 and I had to use just my 50, I would just have to adjust. Usually, my assistant, one of them will always be shooting with a 50mm lens. So and they get excellent results. It's more of a matter of taste than a necessity.
Okay. So, do you ever find yourself at shoots or at weddings where you're taking a picture and you're like, oh, I wish I had a different lens right now? Do you ever think consciously of that, or do you just go, oh, I have this lens, I need to adjust?
I'm lucky that I'm so, I don't want to say limited in my art, but because my comfort zone is really that 35 to 50mm, like I always have those two lenses on me. Or, if I have 35 and an 85, they're not that dissimilar to work with. Also,
okay.
Like a 35, you can just take a few steps closer and get more or less the same photo if you want.
Okay, so it's never in your mind like, oh, I wish I had this or I wish I had that. It's just, hey, I'm going to take this picture with this camera and this lens. I'm just going to do it this way instead of...
There are times when sometimes I get to a new venue. Maybe they have some sort of crosswalk. It's like a huge building, and maybe there's some crosswalk overlooking, or like there's a balcony overlooking somewhere. They go, oh, if I went up there and I had this, huge long zoom lens, like, oh, maybe that would be a cool photo. Do I want to spend a few $1,000s on a long zoom lens that I'm rarely going to use just for that one photo that, maybe will be nice, and maybe the couple will just look at it for 30 seconds and be like, oh, cool photo, and then just never give a shit about it ever again. Like, no, because that's not, I want to focus on more like what I'm known for in my portfolio. I mean, I do the opposite. I love shooting with my fisheye, which looks almost like these toy photos, or it's like these really like these bizarre looking photos that kind of look like a skateboard video or a rap video. When you get that kind of like super distorted, where people's faces and noses look huge and their bodies look super small. And that's like a lot of fun to play around with. And I think that's a manual focus only lens. I think it was $90 on Amazon, straight from China.
Wow.
And Yeah, and I love using it. It's a lot of fun.
Okay.
And it's always in my bag, so I never regret not having it. And it's not something that's something, if that was on my camera and then something happened, I'd be upset that I had my fisheye out to capture a moment instead of... Yeah.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that would definitely ruin it for you.
Yeah, but also that's the thing with me being a professional. Sometimes I am stuck in my ways where, maybe I am missing out on being creative because I'm stuck on doing what I'm known for, because I have a job to do. So that's the interesting thing with being an amateur or being a professional. Like, I would love to tell someone like, hey, you know what? I'll shoot your wedding for free if I can do it all with a fisheye lens and like and like my 35 on the other camera. So I'm not going to I'm not going to take like zoomed in portraits or any, I'm just like, that's it. I'm just going to play around and have fun, and I'll give you what I can take. Like, there are, people like who don't really have a chance, an opportunity to hire a photographer. They just have a friend kind of like take photos around or ask everyone to take iPhone pictures. So I feel like, yeah, I'll get you 50% like professional quality photos, but the other 50% are just going to be jokes.
Yeah. You saw that portfolio that you saw before? No, you're not getting this.
Yeah.
You're going to get the skateboard video remake.
Exactly. I think I have fisheye photos on my Instagram. I photographed my friend Lorena, who's a professional dancer. We were doing her headshots, and I think my fisheye lens had just come in, so I did a few of her.
You're like, gotta try this out.
Yeah, they came out really cool.
Now, do you have a list of like lenses that you want to get? You said you're stuck in your ways with the 35 and the 50, but like, is there a list out there that you're like, ooh, if I get around to it, I would like to get these lenses also?
I'm more looking towards things. I'm looking forward to things that come out that are different in terms of like aperture. Like Fujifilm is messing around with like a super wide aperture lenses like that are like the f-stop is 1.0 or 0.95. Which is like more interesting to me than a different focal length.
Okay.
Because I really don't like using zoom lenses. That's also a personal preference. A lot of photographers love their zoom lenses. I just find usually a zoom lens, you don't get that wide open aperture. They're not as fast autofocusing. For me, the benefits don't outweigh the shortcomings.
Okay. So any other fun stories about how you've broken lenses or cameras or anything?
All my broken equipment stories always ends up with me being drunk at a wedding, which might be another thing if we're talking about like, hey, if you're working, why are you drunk? But
I mean, it's a wedding. You said earlier, it happens.
So I believe I'm a better photographer when I've had a few drinks. I don't get shit faced at weddings. I'm not like pants on head.
That's why you have 15,000 photos, because you just hold down the button the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I do get quicker on the shutter when I'm drunk, but after you've had after you've been on your feet all day, sometimes you just need a shot or two of tequila just to loosen up the muscles. But also, you're a bit looser personality wise, so you're more inclined to make people laugh and maybe get in people's faces while they're dancing, like not rude get in their faces, but like, get up to them and like, even if they're aware of you, when people are partying, they tend to, hey, photographer, look at me. And and they'll do something funny and you can, take the picture. I get more creative when I've had a few glasses of wine, I guess. The problem is I do get louder and I just become more obscene, and I'm already pretty obscene. So
I find that hard to believe. You get more?
Yeah, well, when I'm drunk, like when you speak to me during this podcast, I still have a wall up. Like I'm on my best behavior.
I've actually noticed that you've toned it down a lot.
Today, I don't know what it is. I'll be extra offensive next time.
I mean, you don't have to. You don't.
Well, now I feel like I have to have a standard I need to live up to for you.
There's a balance. I completely lost track of what I was
lens stories.
You have a couple of drinks.
I have a couple of drinks. I get a bit more creative. I'm loud and obscene, but luckily the sound of the music is covering a lot of that. so yeah.
I guess as long as you're sober for the actual wedding ceremony, that's the important part, right?
Right. Oh yeah, no. So I would never. Yeah, don't get me wrong.
Just a few drinks before this wedding starts.
The groomsmen are always trying to get me to do like shots with them in the morning, after the ceremony, etc. I'll never. I actually have a rule for myself. I really only take my first drink at a wedding at 10 p.m. Usually by then, I've already, like, even if I took my camera and chucked it into the woods somewhere, I never took another photo. By then, I'm already comfortable that I have enough, you know, to complete the job. Obviously, I want to, you know, keep trying to get more and better moments, etc.
And you don't want to throw your camera, but yeah, if it happens,
yeah, and I don't want to throw my camera into the woods. But if I'm, you know, once I'm comfortable, like I can't really screw this up. So let's go for it. But generally, those are the photos I end up liking the most.
Now, do your clients like them the most?
The funny thing is, like, I send people photos and they go, "Hey, we love them," and I just never hear from them again.
Okay.
But I get yes, like, people tend to, like, all my couples tell me they love their party photos. That's one of my strengths, is reception photography. It's very hard for people. You have to balance, like, lighting and the ambient lighting inside. It's also looking for, you know, capturing those moments and, like, getting the energy and capturing, like, the fun of it. And that
it's more unscripted than the ceremony part, so you don't know what's going to happen, right?
Exactly. You know, you can have 5 photographers lined up and photograph someone walking down an aisle. They might all look very similar, but I think when you're photographing a party, it has to do with a lot with your settings, what type of lighting you're using. If it's like a flash on the camera, a flash off the camera being triggered, gives you a totally different look. Like all your power settings and how you're balancing with the ambient lighting, you know, the lighting that's actually there in the room has a huge effect on everything. Your lens choice is another one. We were talking about, like, long lenses in portraiture, and there are people that photograph parties. They're in the corner of the room with a super zoom lens, and they're kind of doing it like paparazzi style. And there's nothing
that seems a little weird, but
yeah, there's nothing that makes me disrespect another photographer more than saying that.
Well, because your whole thing is, like you said, you interact with them, like, you're part of the picture. You're basically guiding them where to go with the feelings that you're invoking in them by talking with them.
Right. I would like a perfect party photo for me is being up close to someone with a 35 millimeter lens. You can see, actually, you know, you use your composition and, you know, use a blurry background to separate them. So you know that they're the focus of the photo, but you can see that there's other people around them. It is a party. You know, you get that feeling that you were there in the moment. Whereas if you're in the corner with a 200 millimeter lens and you're zoomed in on someone's face, it's just like, oh, here's the picture of someone's face, like, indoors with, like, green lights coming from the DJ. But you don't even know there's a DJ or a party or other people around. It's just like a poorly lit portrait of someone. Whereas when you show more context, it doesn't matter if the exposure is, like, a bit dark, because you can see it's in a dark room, it's a dark party, that you're capturing, like, the essence in the moment, rather than just, like, here are zoomed in photos of random people.
And that's why you were saying, like, with the 35 millimeter, you show, like, the environment, you show what's going on around you. It's telling more of a story than just here's a person.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So we are nearing the end of this podcast.
Oh yeah, let me finish how I broke my lens when I was drunk.
Oh.
I remember. So one of them, it was a Canon 85 millimeter 1.8, which is you'll notice, like, these were cheaper lenses that I've broken, because this is more or less at the beginning of my career. I've learned to be a bit more careful.
Okay. But I think it's good to specify that it's not like, oh yeah, I break one like every couple of months. No.
Yeah, no. I haven't broken stuff in a while.
You're a professional.
Yeah. So I remember. I'm trying to think. Did it fall off? Nothing fell. I think I didn't realize how low it was on my shoulder. I think I, like, bonked it on a table, or not a chair. It was something hard, because I remember it hit, like, the lens head on, and it kind of, like, compressed everything together.
Oof.
Like, it smushed it. So, like, it still kind of worked, but all of a sudden, like, the autofocus was extremely slow. And I couldn't put the lens cap on it anymore. Like, it was distorted, the ring around it. So, like, I knew the lens was completely fucked. Oh. And that was another problem. I broke a lens. I broke my whole camera at a wedding once. The lens was fine, but this was before I had, like, my holster. I have a holster system now, so it's like a leather strap, and I look like either, like, a hipster doofus or a detective, depending on.
It can only be one of those.
If you look at me from the back, it's like a leather, like, looks like leather suspenders, so it looks like a hipster doofus. But if you're looking at me from the front, it's like I have the two cameras hanging on either side of these leather straps, so I look like an old school detective from
This
a
guy
movie.
means business.
Yeah, exactly. I'll shoot you. Get it? um, so before I had that, I had my cameras on a shoulder strap, and it just slid off my arm, hit the floor, and just like little springs and screws just flew everywhere. Like the shutter button, like just wasn't on the camera anymore.
Oh God!
And I just
Was alcohol involved in this one too?
No, because this was at the beginning of the night, so this was just general stupidity. And this actually wasn't that early on either. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. This is what prompted me to get my holster system, and I just sighed. I was like, I'm a fucking idiot, and I was just, did I just lose $2,000 on that dance floor? I went and got my third backup camera. It wasn't a problem. I finished the night. I didn't even think about it because what am I going to do? And then, but when I got the estimate for the repair, and it was only $250. It was just to replace the shutter, like just to release the button. So I was very lucky. I can write it off, so it was good. And I learned a lesson, which is why I have my holsters right now. So people might.
And how much did those holsters cost you?
So that's a great question, actually. So the holster was like $200.
So had you had that, you would have not had to pay $250.
Yeah. Right, and I don't know how many times
they pay for themselves. Eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Depending on how many times I would have broken my camera. And that's the funny thing with photography. We've been talking about cameras and lenses, and you're like, oh wow, like I didn't realize how expensive the lenses were. But that's just the beginning. That's what you need.
I was researching tripods, and I was looking at how expensive they get, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll just hold the camera myself.
Exactly, yeah. And then you start talking about light stands and lights and the different kinds of lights you can get. You can get strobe flashes, or big studio lights and things like that. And every little gizmo and every little bracket is another $150, $200. The umbrellas, the reflectors. Wow. Yeah, so depending on what type of photography you want to go into, there's a whole bunch of bullshit that makes things a lot more expensive.
I think we're going to have to do an episode on just everything that's not lenses or cameras.
Yeah.
That sounds like there's a lot more that I didn't even I wasn't even aware of.
Right. But it all depends it all depends on what you want to do with your photography.
Yeah.
And for everything you want to do, there is a way to do it cheap.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Same thing with the tripod. There are cheap options.
I did see some cheaper tripods, but everyone's like, you want carbon fiber, and I was like, oh, how much does that cost? Oh, wait, no, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I said, right? You're going to look up a review, and someone's going to tell you, like, oh, no, don't get the cheap one, you fucking moron. Like, you need to get this one. And it's like a $600 carbon fiber tripod. Yeah. I use my tripod maybe once or twice a year.
Yeah, we've established in the first episode that you do not like tripods. Yeah. You don't like being anchored.
Yeah, I like my tripod. It's actually a cool one. It has a pistol grip on it, so you can change the angle really quickly. You can turn it into a boom arm, so you can get all these interesting angles with it. There's just never... I rarely am photographing something where I need that stability more than I need to be able to move around.
Gotcha.
So that's why you have to decide what do you think you're going to photograph the most, and then go with that. If you really think you're going to be hiking and taking landscape photos, a tripod is a must. Landscape photographers will take photos at 3 a.m. when there's just a sliver of sunlight, so they can put the tripod on their they can put their camera on the tripod and leave the camera open for maybe 30 seconds or up to a minute or longer, which is you need a tripod. You need a sturdy tripod to hold that camera steady, so you get these sharp pictures at these beautiful times. I am not going to wake up and hike up a mountain to take a picture of a sunrise, so I don't need to do that.
And that's where a carbon fiber tripod would come in handy if you're doing a lot of hiking and moving around. You don't want to carry around all this heavy equipment.
Exactly. If you're doing,
and that's where the money is worth spending it on something like that.
Right. Exactly. If you're hiking up a mountain, you don't want all that heavy gear. If you're doing it in studio, it doesn't really matter the weight of your tripod because you're just bringing it into a building somewhere.
Yep. Okay. So let's end this episode the same way we did last episode. Do you have a what did you call it? A deliberate tip?
Okay. Yes, let's go. What's off the top of my head? Last one I said take a lot more photos than you think you need. This one, get closer than you think you need to.
Okay.
An interesting photo that captivates the audience is usually something they haven't seen before, or at a different angle, or something unusual. We all know what it's like to look at someone. You don't know what it's like to look at someone close, usually. So take a portrait and don't ram the camera down their throat.
Okay.
Yeah, unless they consent to it.
Okay.
But take a picture and then don't take one step in, take two steps in. You can cut off people's foreheads. You can't cut off their chins. That looks weird to the eyes. But you can actually crop the photo in at someone's forehead, and people won't even realize something's different about it. But you'll capture that. You'll get that face closer, and it'll be maybe a more interesting portrait. That's you experiment, and then you just choose which one you want after. So deliberate tip number 2 will be get closer.
Okay, that's I'm trying to. God, I can't think of the word.
Yeah, cold outro. Just cut.
Okay. Thanks for watching.
Yeah,
or wait, no, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Unless you're watching. Unless you're in my house and you watch me do my circle hand movements.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you wear clothes for these?
Thanks for listening to our podcast. I hope you learned something or got some good laughs out of it. Check us out at mandapod.com. MANDAPOD.com. Thanks again.